Hi, welcome. I'm Philip Bither, Curator for Performing Arts here at the Walker Arts Center. And I'm really pleased and honored to have Craig Taborn here with us, who's tomorrow night performing and the featured composer, instrumentalist for an evening we're calling Heroic Frenzies, the music of Craig Taborn. 3 different sections of sort of sides of your current output. But I really wanted to start because aside from your having been here a number of times with a lot of great artists, this is our first chance to really sort of showcase you in a lead in many different sort of frames. And but you grew up here, and so it's really in some ways like a welcome home to you. And you grew up in Golden Valley, and I wondered, you know, reading about your history, you were such a voracious listener and such a curious kid. Where'd that come from? I mean, was it your parents or siblings, or just what prompted you at your earliest memories to want to listen to everything?
That I don't know.
Huh.
I mean, my parents were very open to a lot of things, so they were supportive. But I can't say that anybody around was really like a voracious listener or anything.
Huh.
So I don't know where
Kind
it
of
came
innate
from.
then. In some
Yeah,
ways.
it just sort of emerged.
And you met Reed Anderson and Dave King when you were in your, I understand, like, how old?
Junior high
Yeah.
school. I mean, they were around. We're all from Golden Valley, but we all went to different elementary schools. So it wasn't until like the middle school age.
And I understand Dave has said that you really turned them on to a lot of music. Like they would like lean on you to like what are you listening to and turning them on to a lot of things.
Perhaps. I mean, you know, we were all listening, but I think I was maybe a little earlier. I was getting pretty out there.
Yeah.
With my tastes.
Did you think it was a moment in time in the Twin Cities that was uniquely kind of gave a lot of opportunities for people to hear a lot of wide range of work?
It might have been. I mean, I'm sure it's continued. I mean, I know it's continued. So it wasn't a brief moment. It may be still going on. But you know, definitely it just in that period in the 80s, which was early 80s through.
Right.
You know, that was a fertile time both in terms of the arts kind of thing that exists here was really strong then, so there were a lot of kind of at the Walker, like new music things and just a broad range, and then also just the kind of underground rock scene, the kind of punk rock thing here was strong, and then of course there's like the Prince thing. All that stuff was really fertile and relatively new, or it had flowered at that time. So there was a lot of things going on, I think, in that scene, like going to 7th Street Entry, stuff like that. There were a lot of shows and being able to go to all ages shows. So it was really marrying that world with a lot of the artier stuff that I would get to see, like coming to the Walker. Just bringing all those things together that really kind of created a context in which it was, you know, I was able to see a lot of music live. That I think many people in the States wouldn't get to see. Right. You know, or in the punk rock thing, maybe, you know, in the little communities, but just seeing that and then being able to kind of compare it to, say, seeing Last Exit here, which was something that was big, you know, and it's like, oh, right, there's
Laswell and Peter Brassman
and Shannon Jackson. And Sonny Chirac.
Oh, right, right.
I mean, things like that was big, but it, you know, these are things that you see in these different contexts. It's like, oh, those guys are playing. You know, it was kind of the same thing in a lot of ways, and
and
the
then
same
thing in the sense that the kind of the dedication to pushing boundaries and
or particularly that band would function well like on a lineup. It would have been the same thing on a lineup with Black Flag or something.
Right.
I mean, it very much. It was like, oh, this is like. It's loud. It was louder for Black Flag. Right. It was more intense than that. But I remember. I think I saw that was the same year that was like the last Black Flag tour. And I had seen them within a month of each other.
Did you find that you were unique were other people crossing the lines between genre and the way you were, or did you have to have different circles of friends to go with you to a hardcore concert or to a jazz thing or a
early
contemporary
on,
classical?
yeah. Early on, it was different, kind of some different circles.
Yeah.
Because I went to private school.
Yep.
I went to
You went to Breck, right?
Yeah. So starting middle school, so starting 7th grade. So I kind of left, like just in terms of peer group, I left that, the kind of northwest suburb scene, which was definitely all about like Motley Crue. And,
right.
It was pretty much that. I was in.
I heard
but there was a little more
early bands, you were
mainstream.
playing Bachman Turner Overdrive.
Yeah, it was like a
that,
rock and roll, but nobody had done. And then just some friends of mine that I met when I went to Breck were from like South Minneapolis, or just a little more urban in that sense, and they were into punk rock and things. So it was through them that I started going to shows like that. And people, maybe my friends like from Golden Valley weren't there yet. At all. You know, they were like Van Halen. Yeah. And then I was going to see the Minutemen. So those worlds didn't, later on people started kind of coming to, but maybe not even until college, a lot of those Northwest Suburbs guys. But like in school when I went to, there were a lot of guys here. Like Craig Finn went to Breck with me.
He did?
He was like a year younger than I was, So there were a lot of guys, well, because there weren't that many at Breck who were into that. But Craig Finn was definitely like a hardcore guy.
And it's interesting that when you mentioned, like in the press yesterday, about the impact that seeing a number of these bands the Walker had, it really reminded us what the impact of a presenting institution can have in terms of introducing new sounds. But it also feels like a big responsibility because, you then, that was part of your influence, but then you went off and have become a major influence in jazz and other forms of music, and these things are linked together. And sometimes I think, the presenting world lives in an entertainment side, and the chance to see adventurous music, isn't often there. So I look back at those years even here and go, I'm kind of amazed at how much and how many cool things the Walker was doing at that time.
Yeah, it was impressive. And at the time it was just something that was happening. I wasn't aware of how unique it was. Yeah. Like I saw Tim Byrne here, and I think that, in talking to him about it, I think that was the only gig in the States outside of New York that he kind of did at all. Yeah. In the 80s, he was going to Europe. Right. And then he'd play in New York, and then he did one gig.
Sadly, in some ways, it hasn't changed that much. But when you went away to school at the University of Michigan, and then you connected with James Carter, started playing, it seemed like it happened. It just seemed like it happened very quickly when suddenly you were being asked to by a lot of musicians to maybe play with them or be part of a tour or something. How did that seem like it came very quickly and suddenly you were really in demand, or was that over a number of years?
Well, it was building, but that really has a lot to do with the Detroit scene at that time because it was just fertile. Speaking specifically more about a straight-ahead kind of jazz direction, there were a lot of young players in Detroit. Right. Besides James, like guys who maybe more like even younger than I was. Well, there's a drummer, Ollie Jackson, who plays with Wynton Marsalis. Oh, yeah. And Rodney Whitaker, who did. Oh, yeah. He played with a lot of people, and Gerald Cleaver, who I play with now, I met him.
You met in college, right?
Yeah, we met right away in college. But he's from Detroit, so it was that access to that scene. And then some younger guys, there were guys who, like Ali, and then Kareem Riggins, who's kind of, he played a lot with Ray Brown and stuff, but he's also a big hip-hop guy who's big. His new album, he's really big. He was kind of Jay Dilla's buddy, and he does a lot. He did a lot with Common and Erykah Badu, and he's just a big hip hop guy now, but he's also like a real jazz drummer. And I always remember his thing was like, I play with Ray Brown and I do hip hop. There was sort of no middle ground for him. It was like the most, not just in this sort of the collegiate sense of like straight ahead jazz. But this was like, no, I play with Ray Brown. You know?
Right.
And he wouldn't play with, and then he would just work with all those guys. And he is pretty big now as a producer and stuff.
What ultimately took you to New York then?
Well, that was just because I was playing with James. I mean, it was primarily the James Carter gig that I had going.
Yep.
And then I always intended to get to New York at some point.
Right.
But I stayed around the Michigan area for a while.
Even after you graduated?
Yeah, just to, because it was nice.
Yeah.
I was sort of mostly Ann Arbor, and then I lived a little bit in Detroit, like but they're right near each other. I was playing almost every night in Detroit, so I was always in Detroit.
Was there an active club scene at the time and things?
Of sorts. I mean, depending on the kind of music. Of jazz, sort of.
Right.
Like most cities.
Yeah,
like
right.
2 or 3 places, and then some other kind of gigs you could do.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of things, like electronic music, techno things.
The techno scene. It was kind of already come, or was it right in the height of it?
Well, it had moved back. So the
Yeah.
thing was, like, I would move from here. '88, I went to Michigan, and it was in the dorm first that I was listening to like Detroit radio. I just sit in my dorm room and like get these radio stations. And that's when I first heard like that Detroit techno. It was like '88. So those guys. It was like the year those guys had left.
Oh,
But I was hearing this stuff that wasn't like
anything. You heard.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, you know, because that stuff, it was real Detroit. So it was like electronic African music. That's what I thought it was. When I first heard it, I was like, this is just like African drumming, but with like analog synths. That's what it sounded like. That variety was really.
Right.
I don't remember what I was. It was probably some like underground resistance kind of stuff or something.
Yeah.
But that was early on because it was like those radio shows, Electrifying Mojo, and these things that I was just getting in the dorm if I could kind of tune in. And that was the first time I heard that. I was like, what is... And I was doing things it didn't sound... It kind of sounded like that.
Right.
With my own kind of synth setup. Kind of thinking that with just the rhythm, this sort of rhythm thing.
Right.
With electronics.
But hearing that, did that inspire a different way of thinking?
Oh, totally, yeah. It just was like, oh, wow. Because then I started listening to that all the time. But this was before it was anything like popular.
Yeah.
This was just getting going. Because, I mean, that was sort of the Summer of Love London thing.
Right,
it was like 87, 88.
Oh, yeah,
so
that's right.
When the sort of acid jazz and techno and rave stuff started taking off there. So this was before it came back as sort of a cheesy pop, culture thing, which I wasn't into. But like around 92, those guys started coming back.
Back to Detroit.
From Europe, like Carl, because Carl lived in London and stuff, and Derek May and Richie Houghton. All those guys had lived in wherever, Brussels.
And they were
starting to come back, and there was a wave back of...
Were you still there at
Yeah,
that
I was
time?
living there, So I know Richie Houghton had come back. Well, he was more Windsor, but, still Detroit. And he had started doing raves. That was the first I had heard of a rave. He was bringing that culture back. And then it was sort of building up. But it is something that was always in Detroit. But it was a different scene.
Did you find your jazz colleagues were resistant when you'd say, hey, let's go check this out?
I wouldn't say. I just go check out what I wanted.
Right, yeah.
So.
Yeah. But you, when your youngest, one of your first instruments was an electric keyboard, right? So do you consider yourself a kind of post-acoustic artist in the sense that I've heard you say you play differently because you grew up playing with electric keyboards and synthesizers and things like that. Is that accurate, would you say?
Yeah, I think so.
How do you mean exactly?
Well, it's just from the moment I started piano when I was 11 or 12. I think 11, the end of that year. And then by the end of the next year, I got a Moog synthesizer. So before I could really play piano well, I was turning knobs and exploring sound. And so the two things have always been a part of my music. It wasn't like I didn't become a pianist and then all of a sudden say, oh, I'm going to try playing keyboards and approach it that way. My musical growth was sort of, I had both things present. And so I'm sure that just an understanding of even sound and how to build a sound came alongside my first even trying to figure out how to, play a chord and get my fingers not to move off the keys, So I was turning knobs and it's like, okay, oscillator, filters, this is what happens with this. Was really at the same time that I was playing, hot cross
Acoustic,
buns.
yeah.
Like seriously, like the
right.
first year of piano, was my first year of synthesis and sound synthesis. So I had a different sense of, like, to this day when I hear sounds, my model for understanding them is, it's ear, and I hear it as pitch information, but I hear all these other things in it that I developed a vocabulary for and an understanding for, in terms of like, oh, this is a resonance peak here, and this is where this, just sound science stuff.
Right.
And I always understood that, so it's like, oh, I hear that trumpet, but I'd already understand maybe how to approach synthesizing a sound that was similar to that. So my understanding of sound is definitely informed by that as much as anything else.
Right.
And so I can't just hear it separate from that. I have a real working sense of how to build a sound.
Right.
Or what it may mean, from that, whenever I hear sound. But at the same time, my piano thing was very piano and acoustic oriented. So they just kind of coexist for me. Because I got really into that, just how to play the instrument, the piano as well. But it was never separate from synthesis.
But this is jumping way ahead, but a record like your recent solo record, Avenging Angel, the sound is so unique, it almost feels like if you hadn't had all those years of existing and playing around with electronics and electric keyboards, your approach to the acoustic piano might have been very different. Is that accurate?
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Just because a lot of it, there's a lot of the solo thing that's me approaching the piano, but with that sense of the possibilities for sound architecture from it. So the piano technique exists to try to get at some other sound possibilities, a lot of them that aren't necessarily part of the piano performance tradition.
Yeah.
Like I'm just thinking about the shape of they are from some really great composers.
You've mentioned
and stuff.
people like Sun Ra, or was the Miles Electric period influential as well?
Yeah, that was big. That got really big for me. Yeah, pretty early. And then it got bigger. But yeah, I was always into the Miles Electric stuff. That was always a reference point. And then it got, and then in sort of high school and then college, it got bigger and bigger just for some, because, one thing is just some of those recordings, all of a sudden they were available again, or it was easier to find. Because there's just sort of a little dip in the 80s where you could find things, but some things were harder to.
And the library didn't stock them as much as they used to when you were younger and things like that.
Well, they stocked, the library stocked more avant-garde stuff, but just that Miles kind of avant-garde, that kind of stuff that just wasn't.
Yeah.
Because
the jazz world was kind of, they didn't know what to do with.
I was just reading an interview, just today, an interview with Miles from like 85 somewhere, and the interviewer was really funny because the way he was disparaging that. He disparaged that period from the 85. I mean, he was happy that Miles had returned to melody. And, he's talking about the "You're Under Arrest" record. And I was like, at last. And he really wasn't.
Did Miles let him have it?
Miles was talking about the guy didn't really get. It's interesting reading it now because he had no idea sort of where Miles was what he was talking about.
Right.
At all. But yeah, it was just clear. He said something about how it was cluttered, and the 70s stuff was cluttered, and he said, he described it well. He said sweaty but cluttered and something
chaotic.
Chaotic. Yeah, he just thought it was.
Yeah. Now that it brings us to a band like Jung Magic, which is now almost 10 years old.
Yeah.
And a lot of players I've talked to have talked about what an influential record for them that was. When you went in to make that record, did you go in with the idea, I'm going to make a statement that isn't happening right now in a scene, and Or was it just a natural, like, oh, these things are both part of my life, and I want to put them on a record?
Yeah, it was more the latter. I was just I mean, I'd always done electronic stuff, and I had this sort of experimental or whatever kind of jazz thing going, and I just wanted to use or kind of have a project where I could use all those things that I'd always had going on, and had ideas for music like that for years, you know, all along, but I never had a context. I mean, there were groups where I did things like that, but never had a context to explore it and record it and document it.
Yeah.
And you know, the technology at that time, there were things that were possible all of a sudden in terms of really making something like that work. So for me, it was really just a chance to explore process. Like I wasn't thinking stylistically about marrying styles. It was more just if I use electronics fully in this process of creating some kind of new music thing, improvised music thing with live musicians, there are all these different avenues I could approach. And I wanted to just, that was just this, you know, starting place of saying, okay, let's explore process. What's possible with these things. So every piece is constructed really differently.
Yeah, I heard. I mean, you can hear that in the record. It's almost like you used a different system or approach on each of the individual pieces.
Yeah. I just let the piece decide, you know, determine what it needed.
How important was the studio? I mean, at first you never had intention to take that music and take it on the road and play it live necessarily?
Yeah, I mean, it was always in the back of my mind, but that wasn't the purpose of the project was to do this sort of studio project in a lot of ways. I wasn't really worrying about how it would be performed live. So there was a lot of studio stuff, a lot done in the studio.
Overdubs and effects and other things that you could do.
I mean, a lot of saying that because of it was like a free jazz budget with Thirsty Ear. So, you know, that was the trick. That's what the
you
technology
mean a really
there.
low budget.
Oh, yeah.
Which means there's very limited time to have everybody in the studio at the same time.
So the live playing was large, there were some things tracked at different times, but the live playing was live playing. Yeah, I didn't bring people back in. So there weren't too many live, or overdubs, really no live overdubs of people.
Oh, okay.
Like a lot of things were live, but then I did a lot in the studio on my own.
Yeah, and you didn't have a bass player in that original configuration. How was it when you first decided to do a first live date then with Jung Magic?
It was cool. I mean, I used first live date was in Lisbon for a festival called Gulbenkian, which is a great festival, Jazz im Agosto, this August festival of pretty adventurous festival.
Really?
Yeah, it's
still
cool.
going strong.
Oh yeah, they do it every the first week of August every year. Gulbenkian's an art center in Lisbon. It's a great art center, and then they have this festival that's attached. The guy who does it, this guy Rui, they're pretty resolutely, he wants some innovation always. Yeah. It's a great festival. And that was the first one. I did it with Mark Turner was on saxophone, on tenor, and these guys with Eric. Because when I thought of it,
I used Eric Fratzke.
He's always been part of the live. Just because I needed some kind of bass thing. I could have done it without, but I wanted somebody, and I knew he would be the right person.
Yeah.
Bass is tricky for me. There's a lot of great bassists, but I like certain personalities. Just a real musical. I don't want to be disparaging of all the other great bassists, but there's just a certain unique musical approach from certain kind of bassists who really deal with sound. And not just a good bass sound, but really respond. And so they bring, they just bring that musicality to the table. And they're, as opposed to playing functional bass or
just keeping the beat.
There's something about but understanding what the bass, what it can offer to that context. And Eric definitely has that, like for real. As does Thomas Morgan. I mean, those are two guys who I think. There's a certain space where they're similar to me, even though they've never met or
really?
don't even probably know. But
so they'll meet this tomorrow.
Yeah.
Or
But
tonight.
they're very different. But they both play really a very focused kind of structural, compositional kind of bass thing. And they're happy to luxuriate in what's going on. They aren't, which a lot of good bassists are, but they really can go. I mean, just if you're moving away from things that have traditional bass function, they still can fit the context.
Yeah.
And that can be tricky
for other players in the band and things, or
if you have somebody who's not. Well, one thing is just having somebody who's, because the bass, it doesn't always have to be there. So having somebody who knows what to do.
Yeah, right.
Because that's the thing with bassists is they have a certain limited range that they can play, but if they want to play, then they're always down there. But sometimes it doesn't need anything down there.
Right.
And then what happens? Then.
And so is part of it a really sensitive bass player who knows when to hold back or when to explore expanded possibilities within the bass?
Yeah. And there are other bassists as well who could work, but there's a certain, but then also really able to deal with things that the bass you would want traditionally, like groove and feel.
Right.
That's the thing too, because there's maybe some more extended
kind of
technique,
abstract players.
Yeah, abstract players. But then if you just want to lay down a pocket there, that may be less than what they offer in the other context. So,
and that's something that is really noted in your, like the recent trio record. You really move in and out, and so seems like you need players, colleagues who are going to be able to both go in and come out. And
that's the thing.
Yeah,
that's the real key.
So Dave King was telling me that because Jung Magic has really only played a handful of live dates. Yeah. When you played New York, like there was a line around the block, and it's like a much sought after experience. And we didn't quite realize how special when we first asked you, could Jung Magic come back together and stuff. So we're thrilled to have it open your evening tomorrow. And do you guys have to, because it's been a few years since do you have to like spend a lot of time rehearsing together, or is it pretty instinctual? And
I think everybody has the music in hand now.
Yeah.
The biggest thing is for me, because I have to it's tricky with that time span because the technology changes and I have to re-encounter my setup, which is the thing that gives me the most stress.
So does that mean you have to, it's almost like an archival, like a historic, technology that you use?
Like the files, so like the way it's constructed, because I don't update it, so if I do it once every couple years, everything's changed, even so I have like, there was some stuff in this software, Max MSP, these objects I designed, and then there's all these things I had designed, and then in 2 years, that software has not just updated, but upgraded to like for these different operating systems.
Right.
And so I go back and look at, like I was looking at stuff last night, and it's like, oh, this doesn't open anymore, And of course that you can update it, but I'm like, I don't even. It's like I haven't even opened this. You can the date stamp in there. It's like, oh yeah, this was. I opened this last in 2009.
Oh, wow.
And so I'm clicking on it, and then it's like, where's your iLock key? What's the password? And I'm
right.
like, oh, I haven't. I'm on like 2 computers later, and it's not authorized.
Oh, man.
Because some of the software I've moved on, and I've changed my setup completely.
How is it going to be okay?
It'll be fine. But it's always like, oh, what did I do?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there's things that I use that don't exist anymore. Or that don't work with Intel Macs now. Like last time was PowerPC.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, they never upgraded this software. Like there's one librarian editor to work with a certain controller. Because the last time I had everything mapped to this old core controller, and now they don't make the editor librarian anymore for me to like pull up.
Right.
So I could easily see how I'd even mapped. And I had this really elaborate MIDI map then, like with things going to other things. I'm like, I don't know where these even go. Right. And I tried to open the editor to see where I had it all written out, where I could see it schematically, and it doesn't work.
Wow.
So I had to go, so it's all, I don't know. I had to kind of start from scratch with that one.
Really?
But it's all, I mean, it's all
Yeah.
It's
Have
all
you found
cool.
that with other people that work with electronics and things that you hear like, oh yeah, I know even in our galleries and with visual art that uses a certain technology to a certain era, the registration people here, they have to like, how do you protect that era of technology so you can always show it?
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I think if I were one difficulty is just for the last couple of years, I just kind of shut down my electronic thing.
Right.
Really. I mean, I would play electric gigs, but I really didn't go hard into my computer thing.
Right.
I'm getting back into it now.
Yeah. Did you find that you would have two different audiences for your something like Jug Magic and something like the acoustic trio and things? Or were people in this era, do you find, more open and able to fluidly move? There used to, we were talking about like, how people responded to Miles' music. There once was, and I don't know if you still experience this, a hardcore jazz audience that really doesn't want anyone to plug into electronics or other things. You still finding that occasionally, or?
There are people who have their predilections.
Right.
Yeah. But a lot of the audience can moves more easily back and forth these days, I think. I mean, when I first moved to New York, I was encountering more of that just because I was coming from these different places.
Right.
Like there's all the stuff I had done with James Carter it was originally a bit more out there and avant-garde, but then it got sort of mainstream just by the path, of the record labels and stuff. It became, in a certain sense, more mainstream, even though it had its thing. But when we started, it was a little more avant-garde. And then, so there was that thing, and then playing, but then I was also doing this techno stuff when I played with Carl Craig.
Yep.
So I had this electronic world that was purely electronic, and then there was sort of the Roscoe Mitchell kind of
AACM.
So this avant-garde acoustic stuff. And when I went to New York, I was doing those three things, which were really different. So people were calling me or had totally different, a totally different awareness of what I was doing. And that was interesting, So I was still.
Did you find yourself a bridge figure then between worlds a little bit? Like, hey, you should check this guy out, or that kind of thing?
A little bit, and there were other people kind of going in that direction too. So it was sort of the trend. What happened was I was getting a lot of calls because I guess there weren't. Well, still it's a little tricky, but at that time there really weren't that many. Like the call was always like, I want like a pianist who can improvise and play piano and is sort of familiar with like traditional harmony and stuff and has some
standards
technique
or
and
whatever,
stuff, but who works with electronics and does all this electronic stuff.
Right.
And there weren't that many. The guys who would do it were more fusion guys.
Sure, right.
And they didn't want that.
Right.
It was sort of, that wasn't in fashion, so they didn't want somebody who was going to blow. They wanted somebody who could play chords, but then do a little more, at the time, contemporary synthesizer stuff. So I was getting and this was like the drum and bass window where all the jazz guys wanted to do drum and bass. And so there was that thing. So like Graham Haynes, there were a lot of guys in New York who were Jojo Mayer, like all these guys who were like, oh, let's play. They were doing that too.
Right.
So
you were, during a period, I mean, still, you played with so many different people and so many different bands. Did you have to set at some point, or did you always have a standard where you'd get calls and you'd say, it's not for me, you pick and choose because you really only wanted, you felt like you most wanted to work with people you really admired and respected and things.
Yeah. Well, in those days, I really I was getting called a lot, but I was into just trying things out. So I kind of took out everything.
And was it mostly good experiences then?
Yeah, because I was into exploring, just seeing how people put their music together.
Yeah.
So I didn't get too picky and choosy in that sense because I didn't really feel the need. Everything that was interesting at some level.
Yeah. How about now, today?
Now I wish I could be that way, but it's just the way the career trajectory has gone. I don't have the time that I would like to kind of do that many things.
Sure, because
things take a bigger
there's a lot
chunk.
of demand for your bands, the things you're leading. And things,
Yeah, there's
right?
things you you learn about, like you figure out, which is that if you know, the way promoters work, if you're touring with too many bands, it can like undercut your own project. You know,
Right.
if you're doing a tour, I mean, if you do, because I've been even playing with piano trios, like there's like several piano trios that aren't my group, like maybe a bassist or something who wants to do a trio. And trios are all the rage because of the economic crisis, so people are always looking for like 3 pieces, because it's easier to tour with. You can do a tour with 3 guys, but 5 guys, it's too expensive. So they're like, you want to do a tour with me, like let's say a bassist or a drummer, and then we'll play my music, and I would love to, but then if that's in March and then I have a trio tour in April, it's like, from a promoter perspective, it's like, well, we just had that trio.
Right.
Little things like that.
Sure.
Then you have to say, oh, I'd love to play your music in that context, but I maybe shouldn't. You know, it's like or it undermines their thing too. Right. Because if I'm doing, then so there are those kind of considerations, and just things. Some things take more time now.
Yeah.
Like different groups I'm involved in have, at their level, they'll take up maybe, a month or 2.
Right.
And then so I can't do all the little things. Where back in those days, the tours were small enough and piecemeal enough that I could fit a bunch of.
Is that because it's more prominent in demand people that you're playing with?
A little. There's some of those kind of.
And those tours a lot are in Europe, aren't they?
Yeah. And the States. So.
Oh.
So if somebody, says, "Oh, can you hold October and November?"
Right.
And then I get a bunch of calls like, "Oh, we have, like we're gonna go do this a couple festivals in late November. Can you do it?" I'm like, I'm holding November.
Right.
Right. Which is happening a lot. And there's things I like to do. So sometimes I try to. I'm figuring out how to manage.
I'm amazed at how jazz musicians like yourself who play with a lot of people have your own ensembles. You have to be kind of an organizational mastermind and an entrepreneur in your own. How do you manage it all yourself? And you take the calls. You've got a big schedule that you like.
Yeah, I'm not
work
good at
out,
it,
and it would be mind-boggling. I think.
I'm not good at it, but it's
How do you like being a band leader? Versus your earlier when I first knew of your work is primarily working with other people's groups, and now. You've got the trio, and you're doing solo concerts, and you sometimes Jung Magic and other. You have other groups as well besides the.
Yeah, I mean they don't get out as much.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Do you prefer playing with your own music in that configuration than playing with someone else?
I like them both. I mean, I definitely like doing my own music. It's just fun to kind of create context and bring people together.
Yeah.
But I don't really, when I do it, it feels the same. I mean, to a certain extent, like I like just play. Once I start playing, like with Jung Magic or with the trio, once we start, I don't feel like it's my music.
It's really you've created the frame or the platform for people to.
But I invest myself in if I'm a sideman, I often, depending on how interesting the project is.
Right.
Everything seems to be pretty interesting. I get into doing that as well.
Right.
So from that perspective, it feels the same. It's easier to be a sideman because you just don't have to worry about anything.
Yeah, right.
But then there are certain things that people don't, like I have a certain sense of things that I want to do that other people do. There's certain itches that other groups don't
that you
scratch.
can't do elsewhere.
People aren't really maybe thinking that way about and I am. So that's what I use and stuff. But I like doing my own thing. It's that career trajectory where a lot of my friends who are, sort of advancing their thing, definitely they've taken, like someone like my friend Vijay.
Sure.
Who you had, But he's always been, I think like years ago he was like not as in demand as a sideman, so then he was pushing his thing, and now it's like he has so many projects of his own stuff. And that's you kind of at some point turn it into your thing. If you think about real successful guys, they don't do that many sideman projects, or if they do something, it's always now it's a a co-led thing.
Sure.
But I learn so much from other people that
Yeah.
it's tricky. I don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
I've been told professionally by people, sort of would-be managers or whatever,
Right.
that you should think about that.
Focus primarily on your own.
Yeah, because you even
things.
pace, you know, it's
Yeah,
like if you do
sure.
assignment man thing with this, but like most of the interesting stuff is coming from like
Yeah.
these kids in, you know.
Yeah.
It's like that's cool. I'd like to play with that, but then it's
Right.
like, well, then they're not gonna. It's not gonna pay, and you're gonna undercut everything.
Yeah.
You have to think about the time, but
Sure.
I'm still excited by that. So.
Somebody like Jason Moran also seems to still try to play with a lot of people.
He does it. He does it well, but he does it in. He does most of that in New York. He'll check
Right.
it out, and it's always, you know, he's always like making sure.
Sure.
But he's a real champion of as is Vijay, but like Jason's really, like as he moves in to these different spaces, I notice he's really takes care to like encourage the entire scene.
Yeah.
And it's cool.
Something you both have done too is that I really, the first project we did with Jason, he was with Greg Osby first, but then he did this project with Sam Rivers as a guest artist. And, you know, your work with Roscoe, you know, it also, do you feel also that there's something of an obligation for people of your generation to also look back and shed some light on some really master people who don't get the kind of attention they deserve?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Are you still doing things with Roscoe Mitchell?
Yeah, we're talking about doing a duo tour next year.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been talking to him, so that'll be coming together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Now, the solo record, it's such an interesting sound you've created. I mean, the pieces are so beautiful, and it's got this, someone described it as a dark-hued kind of mystery or something. I mean, there's such a distinct beauty in the record. In some ways it challenges listeners in such an interesting way. It uses space really interestingly. Were you surprised it was so well received and it got so much attention and awards and things like that? And
I guess. I mean, I wasn't. Was I surprised?
Or more like it, because suddenly, you know, I was just very happy for you to see it get all this these awards and things like that. And it was like people were saying, you know, they've discovered that you were out there in some ways, you know, which you'd been doing work for 20 years or something, you know. So it seemed like it was about time. But also, you hadn't really done that kind of solo piano project.
Yeah, that was the thing. I mean, it was interesting because I'd been doing that, but that was coming from a context where I was winning because I was playing with this Chris Potter Underground and and then on the other, like sort of to the left of that, playing with Tim Byrne and doing like electric stuff.
Right.
So like everything I was doing was electric, and I was getting these sort of downbeat critics polls always for electric keyboards.
Right.
And organ.
Yeah.
And I always played piano a lot, but you know that world can be a little myopic. You know, it's like, oh, this is what you do, because they're kind of really engaged in their taxonomies, and it's like, but that's that guy, and then this is this guy.
Yeah, right.
Oh, he's the solo, you know, he's the piano guy, and then that's the electric.
Right.
And they can't really, even though everybody does like a lot of things, you know, but they get really tracked in that way, you know. And so I was getting, you know, getting a certain notoriety as this Rhodes thing that had been going on for like 5 or 6 years, which is always struck me as a little, because I mean, it's a cool keyboard, it's an instrument, but it you know, making it into a whole world.
Right.
There was a sort of a attempt to do that sort of was a little strange.
Yeah.
Like when I played with Dave Douglas on through, it was like, oh, he's playing the Rhodes, and you play the Rhodes. I'm like, yeah, but it's a key. I don't think of it like the piano. I think of Rhodes as a larger body of electromechanical keyboards that I like.
Right.
But I don't know that they constitute a whole world, a whole class of instrument. I wouldn't want to just be a Rhodes player.
Right.
But that whole thing was going on, and then so it just seemed like I was doing these solo piano things more in New York, in the city, and developing that, and I was sort of just ready to document it.
Yeah. And when you went into the studio, when ECM invited you to do a solo record, I understand that you laid down like 30-plus tracks. How, I know you get asked this all the time, but how How fully sort of set were those pieces at all, or did you just sit down and just go?
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. It's an improvised process.
Yeah, and
that
so
whole thing,
will
yeah.
those pieces, the way they sounded on the record, is it totally different when you do it live?
It's always different. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No,
So,
it's an
so you don't
improvised
really
thing.
know what you'll do
With that, no.
quite for that section for tomorrow night's show.
No.
Yeah.
No, that's the whole. I mean, I use Avenging Angel now because concert people have used that
Right.
almost to describe the process of improvising.
Okay.
But it's a specific process. I mean, saying that, I mean, it's totally open improvisation, but as opposed to like, well, even Keith Jarrett now is more like that. But as opposed to like calling it traditional, that 70s Keith Jarrett, the long form,
Facing
like
You,
yeah,
kind of, yeah.
or specific like Cone concert,
Cone concerts, yeah.
Bremenless, you know,
Right.
those kind of, you know, hour-long
Oh yeah, right.
vamp excursion explorations that go on. I just decided to focus on a few materials and try to milk them compositionally and make smaller pieces and things.
Right.
Not as a adverse reaction to, just as a way to do something else, because there was a longer tradition, or even like Cecil Taylor or something,
Sure,
of the solo
right.
piano improvised,
Right.
you know, Odyssey.
Yeah,
You know, these
right.
like, oh, put
Might
out
be a
4
2-hour
albums.
piece.
Yeah,
right.
And just go, and I just always was thinking about how I could. I mean, I was open to that possibility,
Sure.
but I just said, if I start with a couple things, like
Yeah.
a couple ideas, like a motif, and then say a dynamic arc in my mind, not prearranged. This is all improvised. But if I sit down and say, okay, I'll give myself 2 or 3 elements. Like, okay, what if I use these 3 intervals and think about this arc, and then maybe something else, maybe even where I use extra musical things,
Right.
and like just that's the only thing I'm going to use or think about. Now I can do anything with it, but it's got to come from that information. And then what kind of piece will this yield?
Right.
And I found that process tended to invite these sort of smaller or shorter, kind of tight little compositional packages.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And it was a way of doing it. And the more I engaged with that stuff, for real, I found that often it worked out better for the improvisation. And this isn't anything new. I think
Better
this is
as you played it and felt it, or better when you listened back later?
Both.
Yeah.
Because the challenge, of course, then is usually what do you do with a concert length performance, and
Right.
to make it interesting, or make it interesting for yourself so that you can make it interesting for the audience.
So if you have, say, a concert length solo evening you're doing,
like if you have to play for an hour,
right.
how do you improvise for an hour and not go into shtick, you know, not
Right.
do all the things that you do? And
Yeah.
that was my answer, because otherwise you sit, like, it's like I don't really have any ideas anymore. So, well, I could do this thing that
I've
I
got
know
another
will work.
20 minutes.
Yeah, I got this thing. This will kill them. You know, it's
Right,
like it's real
right.
show busy, and it's like, and you can work that way, but it's hard to keep. It was hard for me to feel invested in that.
Right,
You know, I
purely-
feel like if I go into the thing, I mean, that moves it towards a different kind of performance. Then
Right.
it's you know, things in repertory, and then
Right.
it's like, it's a different process to sell that, to even
Sure.
to embody that. And if I wanted to do that, I would just do that. Like I'd
Set compositions.
I'd
then,
make
yeah.
compositions that I'm
Right.
really invested in. But to do it improvisationally and then say, well, there's this area that I know works. It's kind of not far enough towards.
It's sort of like cheating almost, or
Yeah, I
it
mean,
doesn't
a lot of
feel
people
as
do it, but I would
as-
rather. It's like, okay, that's moving towards composition. So like, let me. If I want to do that, I'll like write I'll
Right.
have a body of material that
Sure.
I'm doing that with.
Yeah.
That may have some improvisation, but there are pieces that I can do it better. Is the point?
Right, yeah.
But if I'm really going to improvise, I want to really improvise. But I've just found that you can just attending to certain tasks that way, and then finding the music in the moment. Like, okay,
Right.
this means the shape. It'll shape itself if you kind of invest in that.
And have you determined, like, this is going to be a short form piece, or this process, this approach you're going to take to this set part, will it sometimes run 10 minutes or other times 3 minutes?
It can
just
go,
based on how it evolves as you move forward? And,
I mean, I'm open to it going for an hour. If I found some material that was compelling enough
found
that
it in the moment.
Yeah,
right.
That was compelling. I'm like, oh, this is, because I follow that
Because the form that you're thinking that you've taken on doesn't necessarily dictate a particular length so much.
Yeah, it just seems that I've run out of, or I find a nice
arc kind
of.
Or,
And they've tended to be shorter.
Right.
They've just tended to be shorter. Maybe.
Yeah. Does it relate at all to, you were, something I was reading, you mentioned about how important limitation is for creativity, that by setting some, this was in relationship to technology, like people saying, oh, you've got this whole world of new technology, isn't it great to explore it? And you said that you thought it was important to put parameters around so that that limitation sparked a kind of creative work. Is that similar to this short form in a certain way?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you explain what you mean by that a little bit more? Or?
Well, I think it's just that...
Because I've heard it from dance artists, from theatrical people, performance people, and others.
I think that creativity is often invidiated in response to certain obstacles or certain constraints. Like that fuels it. It's like, how am I going to, sort of free reign in a way doesn't give you much to creatively push against. There's some kind of dialectic there where it's just your creativity can be sparked by any kind of limitation. It's just how you're gonna. Okay, well, how do I work with this? Just like what's the film Five Obstructions?
I don't know
what's
if I
the
did.
name? Yeah, the Danish.
Lars von Trier.
Yeah, Lars von Trier did that Five Obstructions where he took that other his favorite Danish director.
Yeah.
And then he would give him these tasks.
Yeah.
Like sort of make a film, but you got to do this, this and that.
Yeah.
And he did it to challenge him. It's that
right,
sort of
sure.
And then like what the guy did was just things that almost seem impossible.
Do you, when you go into a new project, will you purposely kind of consciously set up certain kinds of limitations for yourself around? Yeah.
I tend to do that, and that's how I tend to improvise too.
Yeah.
Even in other contexts or in the freest contexts, I mean, it's more something that it's not like I think everybody has to do that. I just found that it gives me something to do.
Yeah.
I like doing that. I mean, it's pretty arbitrary too, and the more arbitrary, I mean, almost in response to like a John Cage kind of sense of things, of letting things go. Because if you're improvising, it's inherently willful in process, but I'll allow for, which is sort of not a jazz thing to do, but I'll definitely work with, even if I give it to myself, an arbitrary limitation. Like if I'm doing something, like sometimes in the solo performance, I'll settle on something. I mean, this is on the album, on that recording of Binging Edge 2, where I'll settle on a repetitive pattern.
Right.
And then instead of even trying to feel my way through it, to absolve that, because sometimes there's so much I'm feeling the right time and what's the right thing to do now.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll just say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm settled on this now, let's say 37 seconds. And then I'll just do it for 37 seconds in order to take myself out of myself. Because I think too much, there's always this balancing between the willful kind of aestheticism and then just allowing things to impact you, which creates a creative response. Because then, if I say 37 seconds and then I have to stop that and do something else, all of a sudden I'm not really in control of it anymore. And my response, then it's more exciting. Then it's like, okay, now what do I do?
Yeah, right.
But the world is new, as opposed to, okay, wait, I'm going to wait for the perfect time.
Right.
There's a music thing. There's so much performative aesthetics in a lot of jazz and improvised music, and I try to get away from that a lot, which is about, there's a heroic context to it where you're trying to be the best and you're going to do everything and it's going to be perfect and I'm going to make all the right decisions, and I'm not really into that so much.
Right.
I'm into interesting responses more than I have the master plan or I'm executing this. And it moves all the way to the real heroic jazz guy who can play over any form and is always nailing it. And
Huh.
I did a workshop in Seattle a couple years ago, and I was talking about doing this sort of what Roscoe Mitchell, when I played with him, always talked about irrational phrasing, and I never knew what that was. Like, you guys have to get your irrational phrases together. But I liken that to just being the ability to do that. You know,
Right.
Really be, irrationality. And I was talking about how I always try to have, if I like structure, but I like chaos and irrationality, to always have a conversation with anything structural I'm doing. And somebody asked, was kind of like, you mean that's desirable,
Right.
And then, he's like, oh, you mean you want that? I'm like, yeah, it's essential to keep the thing going, because then it keeps it going.
Right. Huh.
I'm not so into just being correct. I like something to, I
like
need
mistakes
that.
lead to
critical.
great creativity. Yeah.
It's really important. It helps improvisations move forward.
Yeah.
And keep everyone on their toes, but it also can, it's just a beautiful thing, just aesthetically having some kind of structure, and then something spilling, or it decay or disappear. Just that conversation is always interesting.
Did you find that some people, and I heard some, people read a lot into the solo record. People thought they heard a lot of influences from contemporary classical, 20th century, 21st century, kind of classical, creative music. Did you draw on? Do you find you draw from some of those influences in your?
I listen to a lot of that.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't. Because of that process, it's not. A lot of things are arriving from engaging in the process I described. Like, if I'm.
Yeah.
I think that's more interesting. So it's not a sound-alike thing. I'm not trying to sound like this. I'm not thinking about it that way at all.
Right.
And it ends up working out more to that.
So is it almost subconscious?
I'm not. But what I find is, when you're doing these, like, if you engage with, say, these motives, and you give yourself some rules, you're kind of engaging in a similar, or often, a very closely similar compositional process to the ones that maybe those composers are.
Right.
And so once you're working with that material in a certain space, things emerge, even like not even thinking about traditional harmony. If you start working with motives intervallically and give yourself a set of rules, almost in a set theory kind of way of like, I'm going to manipulate this information. You can get mathematical with it or just spatial, but I'm going to do that. Once you start doing that, the rules will move things in a way that start to sound like certain composers or something. And if you do it with a certain attention to sound, that's where a lot of that comes from. So I'm often not aware, and I'm certainly not thinking about that aspect of it at all. I couldn't, I honestly, like, I don't think I could. If I were to consciously try to emulate those composers, it would probably be a lot less compelling and just maybe not happening at all.
One of your first couple of recordings were with a trio, but then you kind of went away. Well, you continued, I think, to play, but it was a number of years before your brand new record that's out right now, Chance, came out back in a trio form, and I wondered, how does the history of the piano trio in jazz, do you work against that? Do you draw from it? What's your relationship to that incredible long history?
Yeah. Well, I'm always drawing from it. My intention with this trio was really to play with. I've said it so many times, but to play with Gerald and Thomas specifically. So that was the first move. I just knew it wouldn't be. Even though the potential there in terms of how they play and how rooted they are and knowledgeable they are about the tradition, there was potential there to totally, you could kind of emulate. They wouldn't probably want to do it, and I wouldn't want to do it, but we could kind of go in to the extent that we're capable and emulate a lot of different trios.
Right, yeah.
Because I know they can do that. They can go to all these bags, but I also knew that they wouldn't ever do that.
Right.
Like, they really wouldn't, because they both don't think that way about it.
Yeah.
You're not going to go, oh, he's playing this style, so I'll do this.
Right.
The response will always be away from the obvious, and that was essential. I knew. So it's opposed to me going in and saying I want to make a trio that's defiant,
It doesn't sound like
that doesn't sound like that. It was more I just trusted that it wouldn't, and then then I could just explore composing some things for the context, and then the things I knew that we would bring, which would be an interest in sound and that. So it just sort of was a given that I wasn't worried about. In the conversation I'm having with the piano tradition, I wasn't worried about being too derivative of it.
Sure.
In an imitative way.
Yeah.
But that had everything to do with the people I chose. Because with a different bassist or a different drummer, I'd have to be you could fall into situations. Because you can hear, oh no, don't, I didn't mean that.
Yeah, right.
If you hint at something Latin and they do the Latin beat, and it's like, no, I don't, please don't.
Right.
I didn't want to have to play with people where I had to have that conversation even.
When you have such a close musical partnership as you do with Gerald, 30 years or something, and with Thomas, does it just always work out quite nicely when you play together, or do you have to take certain steps to ensure that you're heading in directions that you find fruitful or that you feel is a successful performance?
I mean, very few. I don't really. I mean, my whole thing is to not dictate or mandate anything. Yeah. Ideally, that's at its best. There's a personal thing for me in the group, which is that I don't do that. I won't say anything. Yeah. I mean, there's some things I can.
But you've got set piece. You've got like from the record.
Yeah.
You've got.
Yeah. I leave it open.
You say we're going to do this tune, but then you just go and.
Well, even that now. I mean, we started doing. I'd do set lists of say we'll go this piece and then we'll do this piece, and that was the most I dictate. Now, like we finished a European tour like last week, and by the end of the tour, by the end of most of these tours, I wasn't calling set lists either. And I think tomorrow night I won't. Just because it's at the point now, because we all know the music.
Right.
And so there's no reason to, like if I want to do that, I can just start playing a tune.
Sure.
And they'll just be there.
Right.
But then I've left it open instead of saying, okay, then we'll go, because I don't even want that mandated, because it's interesting what happens if you let that go with those kind of guys, because sometimes Thomas will start another piece, and then the question is, does that even mean we're going into that piece, or is he just playing that?
Sort of referencing it.
Yeah, and I love all that ambiguity. A lot of people, that drives them crazy, and that's their
other players. You mean,
and other leaders would not want to exist with that, and
because it sounds pretty democratic in a certain. I mean.
I love that space because it's like, what is it?
Right.
The spaces where a lot of people are like, you should define this now. Like, are we going in the next tune or are we not? And I'm like, let's see. Those are the most beautiful spaces.
Yeah.
Or sometimes people will have two different tunes going on. It's like, or they can marry. How can they marry? I love all that. All the possibility that's there and allowing that to happen. Because all this beautiful stuff starts to happen. And it's not coming out of doubt or deliberate. That's the difference. It's not a doubting space. It's just that because everybody's so comfortable with the material that all of that can have its own meaning.
Yeah.
As long as you play that stuff and it's not coming from doubt.
Right.
That's the biggest thing. And a little. I mean, doubt is different from maybe not being sure. It can come from like, we don't know what this is, but we know what it is. We know what we're doing, and wow, these two things are going, like, let's see.
Do you feel it's courage has to be part of it? I mean, is it scary when you first work that way?
Yeah, I think that's the other piece of having these guys.
Right.
There's a lot that goes in when I say having Thomas and Gerald, or having the right kind of musicians, or having the right kind of bass player. I mean a lot, and that's one of the big things. Because they just aren't, like Thomas, I don't think he even thinks about that.
Because it's so intuitive?
And the way his mind works, I just don't think, he's just there. He's very cognitive, so he's like thinking about things, I suspect. Right. I don't really know what he's thinking, but I mean, the way he plays, he's always working with the information in a very structural way, so he's probably figuring things out. Like he'll probably be, if you have two pieces going, he's going to try to figure out how they, I mean, he was doing that on the train.
So he almost thinks, I mean, I guess great improvisers do, but compositionally in the moment.
Absolutely. I mean, on this tour, on the train, because we were getting into this thing, then he'll go so far as to do work. Like he's an interesting guy, he does everything with Linux, line code, like he's not a...
Oh, really?
And so he has all this stuff and he's just writing it all out. And he's into Dotsies, Dotsies?
No, I don't know.
This other way of writing, of doing alphabet with dots.
Oh, really?
And he writes everything, so when you look
he'll sit down on a train between gigs and he'll have in his head still, or will you guys record and he'll listen back and then want to kind of sort of notate some of the changes? And
there were two pieces that we started playing. This happened where there were two pieces we started playing.
Yeah.
They were both pretty complicated, and they shouldn't probably go together at all.
Right.
I mean, it's not the kind of thing where it's like, oh, that sounds like, it's not even like something where you were like, oh, that might be nice together. This was like, just like kind of like combining these two things.
Two different stereos going in both records, fine.
But then he sat down and he was like, I wondered what it would, if I played this bass line over this form. And then he worked out he made a chart and then actually did it just to see. And then he started working that in, and then it gave a whole other place to go. And then this was at the end of the tour, so started checking out what he was doing. I was like, okay.
Well, like those first two tunes on the record, I know they're quite different, but they both have this wonderful, like, kind of momentum that builds tension, and then there's a kind of really beautiful release. When you created pieces that have been then documented on a recording, will you then recreate that, the similar structure, or like you'll approach it, but you'll just weave in every night some different elements, or will you sort of start from scratch?
It's pretty open. I mean, the thing with the recording is it fixes things, I guess, for a certain listener, but that group, that we just finished our 6th tour. With that recording, we had done 5 tours, and then we did that recording over the span of 4 or 5 years. So we played a lot live. And the live experience is very, there's sort of these long-form suite-like sets where we kind of go between pieces.
And you'll pull parts of pieces in and mix.
It's gotten more and more like that.
Yeah.
As I was describing, when we started, I would say, okay, we'll play this piece and this piece.
Right.
And then leave some space. I'd say, we'll play this piece, we'll maybe improvise, then go into this piece, then we'll play this piece, see what happens, and then end with this piece.
Yeah. And do you keep it all together? Do you don't stop? You make it one long on an.
Sometimes, or there are stopping points.
Yeah, right.
But I don't like to talk too much.
Yeah,
I don't like to get on the mic. So like the better. And I like movies. I just like to.
Yeah.
I've always liked sets that. I mean, with people who are good, like Dave King, for instance, he'll get on the mic.
Yeah.
But like I'm not going to go there. I just can't pull that off.
Is that because it puts you in a different headspace, or?
I do, and I like it. I mean, I like people who do that. But for me, the experience I like for the audience is to not break the trance, break the spell.
Right.
So I like concerts that have segues that go.
Right.
I don't want to break it down that way, because then it's a little more cabaret-y.
Yeah. Right.
And I want it more like a film. So I like segues. I just like, because it's a contained experience.
Right.
So I'm thinking about the long arc and how all these things fit the long arc. There are certain pauses, but.
How do you feel? This is more shop talk now in front of the camera, but how do you feel about the 3 separate segments of the evening? Are you cool with that Junk Magic into the solo and into? You'll take a break between each of those segments.
It's challenging. The most challenging part is the time constraint, like just the 2 hours and doing the 3 projects, all of which could go. Because each of them has a certain, they could each go for a while, so it's going to be curtailed in a way, but it'll be cool. But that's the biggest. I like the idea of putting all 3 together, but having everything happen within that, I was like, wow, that's going to be, because I don't think we've ever.
Right.
I mean, we've done 45-minute sets, but even that with each thing, with 3 things, it's like, oh, I can't do that. So, But it'll be interesting.
Well, we can talk about lengthen.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I feel like you know, it would really.
It'll fit. I mean, it
yeah.
and I've done short. Actually, the solo thing works well with a brief statement. What I thought, you know, I played with the trio at the Village Vanguard last year.
Yeah. Very
almost
nice
a year ago.
reviews and things.
Yeah, and that was interesting because it was when we're on the road. It's usually there's sort of two sets. You're either doing a two-set night,
right.
So which usually breaks down to being about 45 minutes per.
Yep.
And then with an intermission, or you're doing one long, which up to 90, and it tends to be 70. You know,
right.
I'll play like an hour to 70 minutes, and then if there's an encore, you have an encore. So I was used to this sort of hour set.
Yep.
I would do like an hour-ish, aim at that, and then if there's an encore, then it'll fill out the 70, and that everybody's happy.
Yeah.
Or the 45s, but Lorraine at the Vanguard mandates
3 sets, right?
Well, no, it's not 3 anymore. Thank goodness. Maybe some people like that.
I thought Friday and Saturdays it was still like, you know.
Some people do. She has stopped doing that.
Oh,
okay. Because I
yeah.
think too many people were like, oh.
Yeah, right.
And the audience kind of gets.
Yeah.
But that can be a nice, weird set. But it's tiring.
I kind of like going to those. You know, I go see some theater or dance or something, get to the 11:30.
It's cool.
You know,
when
set
those are. I always had fun, even though I'd be exhausted.
Yeah, right.
It is fun to play that last set because that's where everything's just like.
Right.
You know, like, and all this cool stuff happens. But she mandates a 70 or 75 minute thing.
Really?
And it's all, I learned the hard way, because it's all like, she wasn't there and I did a 60 and then stopped, because it just felt like, it was just so obvious. It was like, the music, it's just done.
Right.
And
sure.
but that 70, 75 threw me off. Because we had come off the road then, we had done a European tour, and we then flew home, and then the next day we went into the Vanguard. And all of a sudden it's like, how does this arc? I had just the experience of time with these sort of things. I was like, I don't know how to work with this arc. There was always felt like there was just this extra thing. It's like we're done, and now I got to play something else.
Right. So you stopped at 60 and got in
just
trouble?
one night, and the bartender explained, well, it's tied to everything. She wasn't there.
Oh.
And then the manager was like, oh, it's cool, it's cool. But then the bartender was like, look, we get like hell with this because of like, all the cash out receipts starts coming back, and then they're stamped.
Oh, yeah, right.
At that time,
Right.
and then he said it's just like turns into this thing. So, I mean, and I realized this is the way that whole machine works.
Right.
Needed to be that, but that was challenging. That usually meant something extra.
Yeah.
On the front end, but it explained it because I have often gone to concerts there. And I always thought, like, why? You know, it feels like the thing's done. Why are they playing more?
Yeah.
You know? And then I realized, oh, they have to. Everybody has to. It just felt like that much long, too long.
Right.
Just it felt like the arc was
Maybe
complete.
you should have a heart-to-heart with Lorraine. And,
Maybe. I mean, it's the logistics of the whole
sure.
thing. But
You're right. Do you find that, is there, you know, anything else about the trio that you like people to know about, or that, you know, your approach to working in that kind of configuration that people don't you know, have misconceptions about or something?
I'm not sure. Basically, not really. I mean, we're working. I mean, one thing is that we're working formally a lot.
How would you describe that? What is that?
Well, look, a lot of the music is pretty. There's a lot of structure going on, and I'm not really. I mean, there's sort of these free jazz guys, and then there's a lot of structure guys, and structure guys like a performance of structure more, like sort of the improvisation would be an explication of the structure in a certain sense, and then there's the free guys, and they'll want to dismantle the structure and have everything be open to them.
Right.
And like a lot of, well, it's more contemporary. Maybe more people these days are doing it, but definitely it sits comfortably in the middle of that, where both are valid and both sort of co-equal, and they both may be operating at any given point in time. Meaning, like sometimes Thomas will be holding a structure, and it's not out of the sense of duty. It's just that's how he works. And then Gerald may play completely free against it, and then it may morph, and then Gerald starts playing. But it's just this sort of extra layer where there's a lot of things that and it adds to the kind of mystery, but it adds to how things can come together too. Because I think that's one thing people notice, and it's again a part of this my interest in the irrational, commenting on the rational and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But and that's a Sun Ra thing actually. Is like aesthetically, and some other and art ensemble. A lot of people.
Right.
Sun Ra always had this intense like this sort of multi-meter. It's like, okay, the bass is in, 7.
Yeah, I wondered about time because it seems like they're really complicated.
Yeah, they're layers of
time
things
that you use.
Yeah, they're layered things, and they're all different. But
yeah, right.
I tend to work with kind of stratified layers of rhythm, so it's coming more from a place of groove for me than it is metrical complexity.
Yeah.
Where some friends of mine are more, they'll have like really complicated, like someone like the saxophone Steve Lehman or something will have these really complicated and beautiful kind of curves where things are being shaved off. And like, I have a little bit of that, but my thing's more this sort of macro with these layers.
Yeah.
And trying to get shapes moving. I don't know how to describe
and
it.
you've also said, you sort of work from a place of ecstasy in a certain way than necessarily overly formalism.
Yeah. Yeah, all that stuff I'm using to approach more of a glossolalia space in a way. Even the way the rhythms work, it's between that and speech.
Right.
So I'll use complicated rhythmic phrases, but more to approximate speech, and the way I improvise may be more from that. Because when we speak, it's often much more like if you were to notate, if you were to kind of put something like this going on, and then how I'm speaking against it, and then notate it, it would be pretty intense looking.
Are you inspired by speech and the dynamics of it, in part because it's such a human way of communicating, and therefore music sort of translate in a different way? But
I do like speech because of that, but I like it also because it starts to, unlike really metered and sort of 2 and 3 limit, meaning this sort of like binary, like duple and triple kind of structure music, it's more organic. It sounds more like nature. Not just speech, but bird song. Everything that's going on, like all the rhythms in the environment are much, there's just a lot. Everything's going on, but there's always a sense of the large pulse. That's a Sun Ra thing, kind of the space chord concept, which is what he called those free, the spaces where everybody's playing at once and it's totally free. He called a space chord, and that's because it sounded to him like a chord, like a big harmonic picture with with waves in it. So it was one sound that was a unified harmonic thing and he could hear these waves through it. So that's the space chord. So okay, let's do a space chord. But you can hear it's sort of the common denominator, or just sort of the whatever's riding through all of that activity.
Right.
There's always, like once you tap into that, you start realizing it's really hard to not be metered or pulsed. Like I think a lot of people think, oh, it's too chaotic, there's no thing. It's like, actually, it's really hard not to. Because just, I don't know if it's biorhythms or just whatever, but things like if you listen to a chaotic, seemingly chaotic sound environment, at some point you can find the wave in it, like just sort of where everything's relating. And there's something to that kind of aspect. So it's not just speech, but it's a lot of things. But I like to, I get a little bored if it's too regular. Not that I like minimal techno, so I like things that are really regular and just stay there, but I like things that float against it. I like that. And to me, it's all part of a texture, shape. It's a shape thing too. I like shapes and complexity and shapes, and I think that like the way that sort of the Western music and the sort of philological German tradition of analyzing it sort of focuses on this meter and then and the way it breaks it down in these 2-limit things to kind of quantize really complex information. I think you lose a lot of the play of what's really going on when you're really dealing with curves and sanded edges and sort of it's like a non-Euclidean space, and it's like instead of this, that's in So even saying that's in 9/8,
4/4,
like, when
right,
people
yeah, right.
like students will say, how are you counting that, or what was that? And I'm like, well, I may have written it that way just as a convenience, but
Right.
there's a lot of ways it could be experienced.
Yeah.
And so I would say, going back to your question, with the trio, like, I think we engage with that a lot against these structures. So sometimes there's a lot of that going on. So like a lot of pieces on the album. I know there was something Manfred thought was free, and it wasn't. So that he was thinking about like these edits or things. And I was like, that's not.
Yeah,
like, particularly Thomas, and I was like, he's playing a thing there.
Yeah,
it was like, it's actually. But I mean, I totally understand it
Right.
from the outside. It's just like, oh, this is like, it was sounding like,
Yeah.
like a Cecil Taylor
Right.
thing. Well, even
Yeah.
that's much more structured than a lot of people think. But
Yeah. Right.
but I think he was thinking, oh yeah, it's just these abstract shapes.
Sure.
Without without a context, and it's like actually there's a major context going on.
Is that frustrating when people don't get that?
Oh,
or
I don't
no?
care.
Yeah.
Even when I'm saying it now, I'm sort of regretting it because I'm like, it's sort of irrelevant.
Yeah. Sure.
Because
right.
I'm just saying, it's like my aesthetics don't run to that performative thing.
Right,
Like some
yeah.
people will want to make sure,
Yeah.
this is all in the form, and
Yeah,
everybody
right.
should know that it is. That's why I like it,
Yeah.
because I think
Much
those
more
forms
open.
just lend themselves. It's just an armature, like I just use that structural stuff as an armature, or a scaffolding to kind of descend deeper into an improvisation.
Yeah.
You can kind of climb down
Yeah.
and go off around that, and then use it as you like. But I'm not into it. Like, I don't want people counting through it. They can if they want, but it's sort of, I want them not counting so they can hear the other flow too. Because there's other information there besides just whatever you can kind of, whatever grid you can wrap your brain
Must be
around.
interesting when you're dealing with music students who want to quantify or really understand.
Yeah, that's the thing. And that's great. I mean, I'm into that. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
nerdy
sure.
like that. I mean, that's why I have it in the music.
Yeah.
There's a lot of structure in there, but I just don't want it to overwhelm the when it
limit
becomes
it.
about that.
Right.
That's pretty.
Yeah.
I'm not into that.
Are there, you mentioned film a few minutes ago, but outside of the music realm and musical history, are there art forms that inspire you in your work? I mean, literature, I know you studied literature and visual art, other forms of live performance and things. Do you try to open yourself up to as much as you can?
Yes. I'm influenced by a lot of, I mean, a lot of things for me, I mean, just relating to information and time, so a lot of film, and like more absolute film, kind of like Stan Brakhage is big for me, stuff like that. And then, and choreographers, anybody doing things in time, there's a direct relationship that I can draw, just because of the time factor. So those kind of avant-garde film things are always, were big and continue to be big. And just how, like someone like Brakhage, and just how he uses rhythm and space and color, and just the intensity of seeing and how he kind of focused on that and developed his ability to see is very similar to what you develop in hearing, or what one would want to. Just acute hearing. When I talk about attention to sound, it's very similar to how I used to practice. Brakhage would practice seeing, like staring at things to see color. And to see, and it's the same thing with sound, just really hearing into sounds. So it's not just being present and aware of sound. Oh, there's a sound, but it's like, okay, go inside. What is it? It's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's
that
just
sense
auditory,
of concentration and focus.
And going into that. Because there's so much information there. Like that's the thing with improvising is a lot of people use structure, for instance, to give themselves ideas. Like, okay, I especially improvisers, like, well, how am I going to know what to play if I don't have chord changes and and or a rhythmic framework? And it's like, but if you take any sound, within that is a world of information, rhythmic, everything, because it's all vibration. So it's like there's so much in any one sound. There's a host of polyrhythms. There's all this there's things, the waveforms are turning in a certain way, the decay. There's so much in there that you can just start there. And when I do the solo, like the solo piano improv, I mean, a lot of those start from that. I'll start there first, and then pick things out of a sound, and then you can build from that. But you can pick a rhythm, just any sound. It's just It really gets interesting. So there's enough. There's always enough to work with.
Right.
You can make a symphony out of any sort of moment of sound. It's not. Well, and not to take it over. That's like the spectralists.
Right.
The spectralist composers maybe over. Well, I shouldn't. I think they overdid it a little bit. I mean, it's an overcomplicated because it's a little too schematic. It's like, well, they did that. Yeah, it's like, here's a sound. I'm going to build the whole thing from this one sound.
Right.
It's like, but you did just experience the sound. You know, you don't have to. I mean, it's cool to put it on the computer. And then,
right.
But then it's like you're not experiencing. That takes it away. It's like, but what did you hear?
Right.
Because I like that, and sort of infrasound stuff and imaginary sound and those kind of effects are interesting too. And that's a brackage thing too.
Right.
I mean, just going out to the anechoic chamber here.
Right.
Here, and then you get all those it's just like closed-eye visuals and stuff.
Yeah.
You get the same. You have all the same weird stuff going on. It's not the same, but it's a close relative to that. Just like echoes of auditory information that you got when you were a child are still like resonating in there somewhere. And when you go into a space like that, it's like you hear weird stuff.
Yeah. I can see why a lot of musicians, even we had a project a number of years ago, but artists, Lee Ronaldo and others, setting music to text of light, Brackage's film. And, just those years, it seemed like musicians and visual artists and filmmakers were really responding to one another. And influenced by one another. Do you find it, this might be my last question, but this has been really great. Do you, a lot of people bemoan the fact that there isn't as big an audience for jazz, or that jazz is, or progressive music is not as embraced as people wish it was. Do you find it a hopeful time or a discouraging time, just in the musical culture at large, or even the culture at large?
I'm pretty into the stuff that's going on. I don't really. I mean, I'm a fan of music in general. Yeah,
I don't need to just define jazz.
No, but I mean, it's to a point, because I think that, I mean, the sort of taste for certain approaches and a way things sound can, that can be dismaying if you really want to hear a certain thing and then the audience doesn't come for, if you like trad jazz, like New Orleans traditional jazz, and then that audience isn't as big as it once was, and that's what you want it to be.
Right.
That can be dismaying. But I mean, there's enough music out there that I mean, jazz. I mean, just sort of like, there isn't the audience that there used to be. But there are other musics that there's no audience for. Like if you're into so. There are forms, just dying daily around the world. But if you get out more, then you realize it's always like that, and it can be dismaying. But all those things came from a context. I'm just sort of an optimist, so it's just like there's always new music being made.
In some ways, people also talk about there's so many now small audiences, but for so many different niche styles or small styles of music that are living all at the same time on the planet and things.
And I'm into that. I mean, I think I don't really worry so much about. I just think that just engaging in what one is really interested in doing, and just sort of staying true to that it's kind of the only thing you can do, because there's going to be an audience somewhere, even if they don't know it, that they are an audience for it.
Sure.
But just if you keep doing, if this is what you're really invested in, just keep doing that. I'm not into changing or mitigating things to try to get a larger audience. I always think. I mean, some people, there's don't you want more people if you just did? But I'm like, I've never listened that way. I'm like, I like the guy who's just into that one thing, who lives in like, New Zealand, and I've got to go find that thing, because that's, I mean, I'm just into that. So I need that in the world, and I'd rather be part of that.
And do you find the explosion of content that's available to us now also as an exciting thing, rather than an overwhelming thing?
I mean, I'm excited by it. I miss the that feeling of discovery and of preciousness that I had.
It used to be a harder work to discover things.
A lot of work, and things felt really special and precious, and I miss that feeling.
Right.
Just because I remember that feeling, it's like like you get a tape, like a cassette tape of something, and you don't even know what it is, and you just guard it with your life, because it's like, I'm never gonna you know, I may never find this again.
Right.
And it's just like this thing. And it does fall, at some point it does fall apart. You know, the tape like goes,
right.
It gets eaten. It's like, oh, that was the old, I don't even know, or I knew what this was, but it's this guy in New Zealand and I'll never, like I don't even know who he is. And now it's just like, oh yeah, I'll
Google it.
Just like, oh,
but I think there's a sort of a illusion of of permanent, of the things are always there, you know, and findable. But it makes people a little lazy, I think, around feeling that.
But that's another issue. But it is great. But it can make it like you can get sort of this glut of thing. You know, you can just get over full. It's like I have, you know, I know people and they just have like, you know, like terabytes full of like stuff.
Right.
It's like, oh, I got this drive and this guy gave me all this stuff. I haven't listened to it. And it's like there's like gold. But how are you can't listen to it all.
Right.
It's just not. Your life isn't long enough to. If you just sat down and started listening, you'd never hear it all. So that awareness, is maybe a problem. But I do like the fact that things are available. Yeah. To a certain extent. I mean, that kind of part of me is really into that. So I think it's cool, and I think it's great that music can get out there, and that these sort of niche audiences can get whatever they're into.
Right.
I'm just into that.
Yeah.
I think that's cool.
Yeah. Well, Craig, thank you so much. It's going to be such a pleasure tomorrow to see a challenge, I know, but see these three sides of your work and really. Oh yeah,
I'm excited. It's not that much of it. It's just like again, that's another thing.
Limitation.
Yeah, exactly. It totally is. It's just like this is great. Now, what is this going to be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again.
Great. Thank you.
Nice to have you.